Morning folks, it's Jake from Walkie Farm tuning in here with Spud, and a little bit of a different video. You won't see any cattle in this one. Actually, here we go, I'll lie. That's where they are at the moment. That's my boundary fence just behind them. And over to the west here, that's my boundary fence with the neighbour's place over there. And then we've got about half the farm over in the bush lot in that sort of hilly timbered country. But I wanted to show you two things. First, this was a pasture, or this is a pasture that's doing really well, and I wanted to explain how we're grazing this. And then I wanted to show you my poor boy fence here and the pond and what we're trying to achieve there with our grazing management. So if those things interest you, stick around. So firstly, this is a northern facing slope, which do better in spring and a bit worse in summer for obvious reasons. The northern facing slopes get more sunshine and more warmth, especially earlier on, so they germinate and grow faster, but they also burn off, dry off quicker in summer. But I've got 7 sort of semi-permanent paddocks that I then use my infrastructure in between to chop up with the single braid polywire. And what I've decided to do is every rotation around the farm, I'll skip one. So when the cows were in that paddock, I set up a laneway and we skipped this, which is about 2.5 hectare. And then we grazed that hill there back into that south of the house and around, continued on their loop. And this was yeoman's ploughed as well. And giving it that extra rest has really helped with ground cover. It's still not 100% if you dig in here, but the feed in here is a lot thicker. And when we look out the back door, when the wind's blowing, you can see the ripples in the grass here. You can even see a little bit here now, which is just lovely to see at a distance. It looks like it's doing the pasture's doing a big Mexican wave. And so we will graze this when we come around. You know, they'll be here in probably 2 to 3 weeks, but I'll probably skip that one. And then on the next rotation, I'll probably skip that one. They're all similarly sized, and I'm just trying to give those paddocks that extra recovery, let some new grasses compete through, and longer recoveries are tied to better carbon sequestration. And you know, we can't stretch the whole farm out to that at this stage, because that would require some ultra high density grazing, which if you've watched my videos, you know I love it. But we did that here last year and didn't get follow-up rain, and it just completely smoked us, and we're left with no feed at all. So we're just doing a bit of a gentler graze, still trying to get them to graze non-selectively, which I think they're doing a pretty good job. You know, they're still mobbed up into a day's worth of feed at a time, but we are trying to leave behind ground cover because we're sort of looking at it as we're building a base so that then we can get to that higher pasture utilization. Now, this riparian area is the area that borders water. So obviously this is in the center of our valley. This is one of our dams here. We've got one more up the top of the farm. So in those trees there's a pond that overflows into the neighbors, that overflows here, and then here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it continues into the next neighbor's place. And ever since I started grazing, I've always been a believer in fencing off riparian areas, and I think this is a great example why. But firstly, let's look at the volume of feed in here. We've got an amazing display of ground cover. Look at that. And volume of feed, and it doesn't look so much like it because all you can really see is this fog grass, but there is really nice diversity in this little area. This is probably, 4,000 meters square, and in here we've got a lot of phalaris coming up, which I'm excited about. But we fence off the riparian areas for 2 main reasons, and they're connected. So if you let your animals into your bodies of water to drink, they're going to stand in there, urinate, defecate, drink that water, worm burden load is going to increase. And if you have animals that can't handle that, especially if you're farming just sort of standard improved genetics for a pretty conventional production system, they're not going to be able to handle that without a bit of extra help. And so we just keep them out. We're happy to use this water. We'll just pump it to them. Or we will generally crash graze the riparian areas once a year at a pretty high density, and then it'll get that full 12 months recovery. And then the second reason is when everything dries off, you can see this pasture starting to dry off a little bit. We're at the end of spring here in 2025. The greenest the greenest little bits of grass is down where the water is, where the moisture is, where the roots can hit it. And the cows will spend a lot of time congregating around the riparian areas, eating all that greenery because it's the last greenery in the paddock and they really want it. And what they do is they end up bearing off all around your dam and pond. If you ever see them out on a sort of conventionally grazed farm, you'll see that from the bank up to the water line generally looks like this, which is really concrete. Look at that, it's cracking. Actually, it had 2 or 3 mil of rain today, but it didn't do very much. It came fast and disappeared, and the sun came out and dried most of it up already. And you can see here that the animals have been locked out of this pond here for 2 years now with a couple crash grazings, and none of this vegetation was here before. So the reeds, the tussocks here have turned up by themselves, all these other perennials have turned up by themselves, and what they're doing is forming ground cover, because all this bare dirt here, if we have a big rain event, we're going to start to get erosion because there's nothing to hold all that dirt together. You can see, you know, evidence of prior erosions all around these waterways, but we're working on repairing all of that. So by keeping the cows out, the animals out, and just doing that controlled grazing once or twice a year, whatever fits your context, we're able to let the bank revegetate all the way to the edge. We're keeping the animals healthy because they're not drinking wee and poo and increasing their worm burden. We're also bringing a lot of biodiversity and life to our water. So the sound of frogs and dragonflies, the visuals of dragonflies that have come back to our farm since all of this vegetation started springing up here on the water's edge has just been truly remarkable. 2 years feels like a long time when you're looking forward, and then when you're looking back, it doesn't feel like very long at all. So I just love how those things work in together. If you mimic those natural grazing principles of the big migratory ruminants of super high impact, long recovery periods, you start to increase biodiversity, increase life, decrease erosion, increase fertility. It's just an amazing thing. Now look at this phalaris plant. That is a nice, big, wide base, probably a 30 centimeter base. And I'll show you, this isn't the biggest plant in this field. I'm 183 centimeters. Look at that, she's up to my chest and still growing. And there's some up there. Like, I reckon this one would just about be above my head height. I am mindful there might be some little wriggly sticks in here. We are in Australia, so we love our snakes, don't we? We had a snake at the house the other day. Look at this. Oh, look at all the feed there. Look at that. Look at the size of that leaf. Just want to give it a big cuddle. It's probably going to flare up all my allergies. Isn't that remarkable? And then we've got perennial fog grass in here as well, and thistles, all sorts of different thistles. Still got tussocks in here. We've got summer grasses starting to grow down below. We've got some sorrel, rye, barley, wild oats, all sorts of cool stuff. So I might actually crash graze this on this next rotation, depending, you know, if we're here in 3 or 4 weeks and this is all set seed, I'll probably push them through it. I'm not completely obsessed about letting things go to seed because there is so many viable seeds in our latent seed bank, like essentially an inexhaustible population of them, that it's not the most important thing to sort of keep adding to it. But this is a species, I know some Aussie farmers sort of poo-poo phalaris because when it dries off, it's very stalky, and it can really take over in a pasture if you let it, and if your grazing style lets it, it'll just dominate. You know, we really want to strive towards that biodiversity and having a lot of different options for the animals to ingest. But isn't that just beautiful? So, and down here, look at that, all that moisture sitting there, all that clover down there, good ground cover. Should have brought my spade out, but there'd be a bucket full of worms down there. And how do we keep the animals out? Well, just with my poor boy fence. If you've been watching my videos, you would have heard me a few times talk about a poor boy fence. What's a poor boy fence? Well, it's a fence to keep cattle out on a poor boy's budget. Why spend more on a fence than what you need? All you need is what I've got up here. So it's a star picket every 10 meters or so. I found that if you stretch them out more than that 10 meters, doesn't seem to matter how much tension you pull on your wire, you start to get sagging between your pickets, and you can almost, I don't know if you can make it out in the camera, but there's an ever slight amount of sagging there. 10 meters is sort of pushing it out as far as you can. You just drop in those pickets. This is the Amazon reel, which is 90 bucks for 2 kilometers of it. This is the electric fence here, the poly braid. And then just these Gallagher little plastic insulators. I used to have porcelains on my first block. I actually like the plastics more. They're quicker to work on. You don't need tools. You can pop everything out with your fingers. And I found the porcelains, every now and then, the porcelain insulator that sits within the wire pops out, and then the wire will hit on the fence and it'll short. And, you know, I just sort of found over the years that paying a premium to have that premium product, but it seems to give you more headaches and need more maintenance, bit of a pain. I do have insulators set up down here as well if I wanted to run a second wire around it to keep the calves out. When the cows come around with their calves will sometimes sneak under the fence. Interestingly, my calves last year definitely did that, but my calves this year haven't. They've stayed with their mums. Same group of cows. So don't know what the go is there. While I've got you, I might just rip over to where the cows are. I've never sort of driven you around the farm. You can get a bit of a look, a bit more of a tour of our landscape. I hope it's not too bumpy. I'll do my best. If you're interested in seeing the farm like this, a bit of a driven tour, maybe I'll get someone to film me and I'll give you a 1 hour drive around and show you all of our different paddocks and different projects we've got on the go. Let me know in the comments if that's something that you'd be interested in. So that's our bush block up there, and then this is the neighbours here, which is generally not grazed. There's very rarely animals in it. It's more of a, they've got this conservation agreement, so it's locked up. That paddock there, it's locked up and gets grazed, you know, 1 or 2 days a year at a pretty light density. That's all I've sort of noticed since I've been here. But then here's our pasture, there's our house up there. This is probably my best pasture on the farm, well, one of them. I know I say that about a few different blocks, but good volume in there, especially in early spring when because it's north facing, it catches that sunshine. Heap of brome in there. Another poor boy fence just with the gate drawn back for easy access. Lost my dog, don't know where my dog went. This is a little riparian area where this dam gets fed through that neighbour's sort of nature block there, and we crash grazed this 2 months ago. There was very little vegetation in the bank, in the bottom, sorry, but a lot up on the bank. And since we crash grazed it, we had a heap come through, because obviously it was a bit wet down here. The water sits low, had a heap of nice germination, so the cows will be back in there in about 3 days. There's some wombat holes. Haven't seen a wombat for a little while, because I don't come out at night time because I go to bed so early, because I'm so flogged. Hey guys, and there's the mob. And if you've watched my last few videos, I would have explained to you that I'm just I'm moving them forward every day and then rolling up the back fence. And every time I come out, they're only in the new area. They can walk back for water. Oh, there's Spud, she's found me. But they're really not spending any time grazing on that older pastures because it's not as exciting. There's not as much fresh feed, not as much volume. And obviously it's covered with their footprints and manure and urine, and doesn't smell very good. So what I'm finding, this might be interesting to some of you, is I'll set up the next fence, make it hot, reel it up with tension on it, which drags on this poor boy. But then when I drop the back fence, it releases that tension, which then makes everything floppy. So if I was being a real purist about it, I'd actually then go back up and tension that again. The other thing I do sometimes, to stop that from happening. These cattle are all pretty well broke to hot wire. I've had no issues. Last year we had a bit of training to do, but if I was concerned about that, I would. This is hot at the moment and it's carrying about 10 kV, which is hot, but I'll just bring that back and try to do it one-handed without getting shocked. It's a bit firm there because didn't get ploughed, but there you go. Got rid of the sag there. She's all tight again. Like I said, I'm not too concerned about it because they're all pretty well broke to fence. You happy, guys? Just thought I'd check on you. Anyway, thanks for watching. This is the poor boy fence that keeps them out of that riparian area. And you know, I've probably fenced off in the grazing part of my farm, if we exclude that hilly timbered country. It's about 50% of my farm. And with all this riparian area that I've excluded, I've probably cut off, I want to say 20% of that. But it's not wasted because we do grow a good amount of feed in there. We do get to graze it that sort of once a year. I'll then keep it, I keep that recovery up my sleeve for if I'm in a bit of a feed shortage or it looks like it could do with a bit of a nutrient cycle and a graze. We just don't want to let them in there selectively grazing all the time and bearing off all of our banks and creating erosion. So, hey Scoop, you're lovely. That's Scoop's mum there with her head on her back. And you should be due to calve. You've taken too long. Are you being naughty? Rightio folks, you have a good one.